Welcome. Glad to see all of you with us today. Thank you, Judy.
Just a family reunion out there. We get this one done and we start picking up some of the other members of the group. And we will have us our jazz library.
Almost there. Hold on with me.
Thank you.
Steve, thanks for taking time to do this for us. I appreciate your help. I know you're under the gun and you've got some deadlines. I really do appreciate this.
Okay. I mean, I like what you guys are doing, so I like the history, so it's good. So let's.
Hey, it's good to have folks older than me telling me something I haven't heard. I'm learning things from these two guys.
Do me a favor. Would you wave your hand, D? Wave your hand in front of the camera.
I am.
That's good. I'm just checking the delay, so and trying to tighten it up.
Now you know we can hear that paper rattling on the desk, right?
That's not my desk.
I know. He knows who it is.
All right, you guys are ready to rock and roll, D. I'm going to jump off this line and start from the top.
Okay. Thank you to Mr. Steve Williams, President of the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation, who is an engineer par excellence, and he's worked out the bugs in our show today. So thank you very much, Steve.
Okay, going for the introduction. Good afternoon. This is Crossroads, the paths that we have traveled, brought to you by Juneteenth, Nevada and the Samuel L. Smith Educational Foundation. Today's guests are the Jazz Brothers, Michael and Dr. Al Gurrier. We will turn it over to them now, and please enjoy the show, and we hope to have you come back again. Thank you. Dr. Gurrier, please start.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your introduction, which was quite appropriate, in that I'm your host, Dr. Al Gurrier, but in the introduction, I was preceded by my big brother with whom I slept, Michael Mr. Jazz Gurrier. And those of you who know about large Black families from New Orleans, that there were a lot of the youngsters sleeping in one room, at least in the Gurrier household. Michael was the first, and I was the second of 9 children. After Michael and I came Carol and Anne Marie. So initially in our room, they had at least 2 beds, but later on it grew. And the place that grew was a loving home located 9 blocks from the Mississippi River in uptown New Orleans, Louisiana, 13th Ward at 1023 Lion Street. And it's the place where both Michael and I were born. We were born in a house on a kitchen table in uptown New Orleans. As a matter of fact, our grandmother once said to me that our afterbirth was buried in the backyard. So whenever I go to New Orleans to visit, particularly with my children and grandchildren, I drive by 1023 Lion Street, a double Creole cottage in uptown New Orleans, and I say to my children, one day this is going to be a National Historic Monument. I know some sacred ground back there. But seriously, thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking about us. And we can expect anybody, anyone, anything, or anyone else to do for us what we have to do for ourselves. And in the spirit of Crossroads, we want to experience Sankofa. It's a Kiswahili term, which means, literally translated, go back and fetch it. And what is important for us as African Americans is striving and making an effort to go back to recapture our history and our culture so that we can have a clear picture of where we're going. Because if you don't know where you've come from, then you won't know where you're going. So today, two brothers who have been places together, done great things, and are going to futuristic places will be sharing with you how we got where we are. And I'm very happy that with Black women's, we're celebrating Black History now. And in the next few days, tomorrow, as a matter of fact, we'll begin Black Women's History Month. I'll get it straight. And I want to move from that point to pay tribute and honor to our mother. This is not the first gathering or interaction between my brother and I of this fashion. We have a previous discussion that was quite in depth about our history, our family, and our background. And it's available on YouTube on the Jazz Brothers. So when you have a chance, check it out because it'll give you a little more information about our background, our family, particularly our father, Alfred Bebe Gurrier, and our grandmother, May Lillian Porsche Ricard. But today I'd like to pay special tribute and recognition to our mother. And I think Mike kind of is going to pick up on this. We are the strong, dynamic, positive, self-assured African-American role models because of the two wonderful parents we had. And our mother was just, God rest her soul, she was quite a person. Not only was she the mother of 9 children, but I'm just going to give one specific example in my life as it related to my relationship with my mother. And parents are the first and foremost teachers of children. And I believe that we become what our parents are. And one of the significant things that I learned from my mother that I want to share right now. My mother knew that she was living in a day and age where you can't tell your children anything. And Mama, I know you're listening now. I'm going to tell you, not a lot has changed. And we're still living in a day and age where we can't just tell our children anything. You've got to show them. You've got to teach them by your example. And I was a sophomore in college. I had probably a couple of F's on my card. And my mother sat me down and had a good talking to me and told me about how important education was and how I needed to apply myself in order to be successful. Not only did she verbally give me that message, but my mother, the year before she gave me that message, had enrolled in college herself. When my mother enrolled in college, she had 9 children in school. My mother passed me up and graduated from college the year before I did. She never said another word to me, but she showed me. And parents, if you want to communicate a message to your children, if you want to provide some leadership and direction, show them. And my mother showed me that it was achievable and it was something that was important. And I went on to graduate from college, and that was a single achievement for me because the nuns in 8th grade told my mother, don't waste her money sending me to college because I was not college material. But when I did acquire my terminal degree, my mother notified those previous teachers who said I wasn't worth it and said I had survived and achieved. So I want to thank my mother and all of the women in my life and all of the great American women. And earlier, Michael and I were talking about some of the performers who used to perform at the place where our uncle, who was a jazz musician, used to perform. And he mentioned such names as Ma Rainey, Billie Holiday, Bessie Smith, Ethel Waters, Nina Simone, Dinah Washington. And so later in our show today, we're going to be talking about many of these great performers. Like both Mike and I have had personal relationships with Ella Fitzgerald, and Michael will tell you a little something about that. But we were born in Uptown New Orleans. We are both graduates of, our parents wanted us to do good, so they prepared us. We're both graduates of St. Augustine High School in New Orleans. And in our last discussion, I said to Mike that in the 30 plus years of formal education that I had acquired, no educational experience was more character forming and prepared me better to be a leader than the 4 years I spent at St. Augustine High School under the direction of the Josephite Fathers and Brothers. The Josephite Fathers was basically at that time an order of white men, but they called us sir and respected us and showed us how we could respect ourselves. And now they're saying all graduates everywhere, all over the world, in prime leadership positions. But then for me, St. Augustine was a particularly important experience because as a freshman in high school at St. Augustine, Father Joseph Verrett said to me, I want you to come and participate in the Speech and Drama Club. I joined the Speech and Drama Club, and I was fortunate enough with good coaching to win the first place in the LIALO state rally in Louisiana in humorous oration. Yeah, I was a comedian at one time. Some people still think I'm a comedian. But anyway, it was that experience that brought me into radio. As a result of winning the award the second year, I was invited to be a guest on a radio program in New Orleans on WBOK radio with Peter Champ Clark. And Champ Clark that called me on the phone. He said, I heard you won this award. I'd like for you to come and be on my program, be a guest, and share with my audience how you were able to accomplish that. So the next day, I went down to the radio station at 505 Baronne Street, and I left 30 years later. That one fateful day where I walked off the street into a radio station, I became a successful award-winning DJ and a career that lasted 30 years. The highlight of my 30-year career was the creation and starting the first jazz show on Black radio in New Orleans. It was called The Sounds of Jazz. I started working as a DJ at WBOK in about 1959. And about 1960, the owner of the radio station said to me, I'd like to start a jazz show on our station. Do you think that that's something you'd be interested in? And so I shared with him some of my dealings with jazz, the fact that I had been a big radio fan in New Orleans. I grew up listening to Larry McKinley and Gus Lewis, old Black radio. And when I first started in radio, it was called Old Black Radio. So the owner of this station said to me, I'm going to send you to Memphis, Tennessee to train with a gentleman who is called the Dean of Mid-South Jazz Broadcasters. His name was Perry Allen. So I went to Memphis, Tennessee, and I spent about a month with Perry Allen studying jazz programs, jazz music. And it was a great experience because Perry was very involved in the community. And on Sunday, we went to church with the Staple family. One time he got Booker T to take me on a tour. I met the MGs. I went to the Stack Music home, and it was a great experience. And when I came back to New Orleans, I started this jazz show. And the first night I began to plan for the show, I called my big brother, who had been a jazz fan. And I said to him, I'm going to start a jazz show. What do you suggest? So he said to me, well, I've been listening to the Northern Dean of Jazz Broadcasters, and that's Sid McCoy out of Chicago. And so he shared with me what Sid McCoy was doing, the kind of music he was playing, the format he used. And from the suggestions and recommendations that Brother Mike gave me, I started the program, and the two most significant suggestions that he made that he enjoyed when listening to the masters in his area were a theme song. And I selected a theme song by a saxophone player by the name of Illinois Jacquet. And one of his featured artists on the song was a guitar player by the name of Kenny Burrell. And they combined for a really great, nice, jumping tune called Bonita. So I used Bonita as my theme song. And at the beginning of each hour of my jazz show, I played Bonita. The number two significant factor in what Brother Mike shared with me was that Sid McCoy used background music. So I was going through a group of albums trying to decide what I might use as a background music. At first, I thought about Hank Crawford, who was a personal friend of mine, who had done gigs for me at Xavier, and I knew him even before I got into the music. He had a song called Stardust that I really liked. But then shortly thereafter, thinking about Sid McCoy, I came across an artist named McCoy Tyner, a piano player. And on an LP called Today and Tomorrow, McCoy Tyner had a selection entitled When Sunny Gets Blue. So I settled on When Sunny Gets Blue as my background music. Now, being from old black radio, where it was strictly personality radio, it was all about the DJs, Okie Dokie, Papa Stoppa, Mama Lou, Hotsy Totsy. And I wanted to do something different. So when I started my jazz show on black radio, I introduced myself and I said, I'm the host of your show. My name is Al Gurrier. And I started with my theme song and I played my background music throughout, and I used a very mild, soft mellow tone. Later, I'll tell you about the technique that I used that made my show successful and propelled it into the Hall of Fame and into the national spotlight, to the point where there was a time where I was called the Dean of Jazz, Southern Jazz Broadcasters. Brother Mike has a little different story. Mike, why don't you share with us how you got into the performing arts areas, particularly as it relates to radio and broadcast?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I was born and raised in New Orleans, like my brother, and had all of these influences from all of the seminal jazz artists that lived in the neighborhood, whom I knew personally, and had the opportunity to hear them perform. And it motivated a desire for me to gain more knowledge about the art form, which originated in New Orleans. And as that being the background from which I emanated, it's just evolved over the years. I have a very voracious appetite for music and the knowledge of music. And I sort of smiled when you made some comments because, you know, I said, well, I could start talking about Hank Crawford or McCoy Tyner, because both of them had stellar careers. Unfortunately, they've left us, but they've left a very rich legacy. In fact, one of my favorite Christmas songs is a rendition of "Oh Holy Night" by Hank Crawford. And religiously, I play it every year during the holiday season because it captivates the vein of the season. And Hank was a saxophonist from Memphis, Tennessee, and he was trained by Dee Bridgewater's father, who was the musical professor in that area and was responsible for a lot of people developing great musical characteristics and careers. And McCoy Tyner is out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He was one of the bedrocks of John Coltrane's original quartet. But I have always had an interest in music and have always tried to acquire more knowledge. As the old cliche goes, you are what you eat. And what that has reference to is the foodstuffs are the things that are responsible for the development of your body, your mind, your whole self. Well, that also deals with music, and the more music that you absorb, the more diverse your appreciation for the art form is. And I am really, a proponent for jazz, which is America's classical music. And I also like to pass the phrase on about jazz is medicinal, and you should take a big dose every day for whatever ails you, or if anything ails you, you take it. And it has a soothing and a medicinal effect on you to help you to deal with the trials and tribulations of day-to-day existence. My radio career actually started, I guess, about 12 years or so after Al's. I, at the time, was living in Galveston, Texas, and it was the early 70s, and I was affiliated with the United States Public Health Service hospital there. And we had a little music scene where we had artists that would come from Houston, and we had some local artists that would perform in the area that you could avail yourself of their performances. But during that particular era, and I have very fond memories of what happened and how it happened. And I like to tell people that disco was the death of live music in clubs, because when the disco craze hit the country, club owners, all they had to do is buy a sound system and get somebody to play some music, and bam, that was the hook. And you didn't have to deal with the personalities of artists coming in there and not being too cordial, or not coming on time, or whatever the interaction was. But when disco came in, it was the death knell of live music in clubs. So I shall we say, saw the opportunity and seized the moment and approached one of the proprietors of one of the clubs that I used to cater to in Galveston with the idea of me coming into the club during happy hour when the sound systems were covered up with tablecloths, and actually utilizing that equipment during that period and featuring America's classical music, that idiom we know as jazz, during the happy hour. And he bought my idea, and subsequent to that, I ended up with 3 different clubs. I would go from club to club, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 4 to 7. I would bring my cachet of jazz LPs that had been supplied to me by my brother, the world famous disc jockey, and share it with the listening audience. And, also have a commentary where I would, tell people something about the artist that I was playing. And that is how I initially embarked upon this public presentation of music. During this particular period, I encountered a couple who were on local radio, and after hearing my presentation at the club, invited me to come and sit in with them on their radio show. And subsequent to that, they moved from Galveston to New Orleans, and I had the opportunity to take their chair behind the mic. And then subsequent to that, I also moved back to New Orleans in 1982, and they were just embarking upon the organization and development of what has become one of the top independent radio stations in the world, and that's WWOZ FM in New Orleans. It was one of the first stations to broadcast live on the internet, and we used to have a big Mercator map. That's not the round globe map, but a flat map that has the world laid out. And we would put these little pin tacks in the map to indicate where people had acknowledged that they were listening to us from. And I've had people to call me from all around the world, tell me that they were listening to my radio show during the 25 years that I worked with WWOZ radio in New Orleans. In 2000,
I need to ask you a question right here.
Go ahead. I'm amenable to that.
Do you know who the organizer and first president of radio station WWOZ is or was?
Well, the people that I dealt with were the Brock brothers, and the station was the license was originally issued to the Nora Blatch Foundation.
Correct.
And it was subsequently ceded to the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation. That's the folks that put on the
so I need to just share a little information with you right now. So I was a member of the board of directors of the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation. There was a radio station in New Orleans that was faltering. It had a lot of potential. It was WWOZ. So along with a group of members of the board of directors, Moose Johnson, Nadir Hassan, Michael McNaris,
Dan Williams.
Dan Williams. So a group of us got together and prepared a proposal we were members of the board of directors. The New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation is a very uniquely organized organization. Unlike the most common nonprofit organization, 501c3s, it's a 501c3, it's a 501, but not a C3. The New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation was organized and chartered in such a way that at the end of each year, it was required to give away all of the profits it made. And so those of us on the board of directors of the Jazz Fest saw a great opportunity. So we wrote a proposal to the Jazz Fest saying that what we would like to do is earmark money for a period of 2 years. I think it was in the neighborhood of a total of $150,000 for us to acquire the license of WWOZ radio. So over that 2-year period, we were able to manipulate those funds, and this group from the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival, led by this group that I just identified, including yours truly, organized and acquired the license of WWOZ radio station. And we formed an organization, and the first president and chief executive officer of WWOZ radio was Al Gurrier.
Thank you very
Our
much.
history. My own brother didn't know that, okay? That I was the first president of, after we acquired the license, we formed an organization to support, within the Jazz Fest board, to support WWOZ. And I was the first president of WWOZ radio. I was a DJ on the radio. I was a janitor and a dishwasher and anything else I needed to do to make that effort happen. But you're looking at and talking to the first president of WWOZ radio. And how did I get there? Well, once I started my jazz show on WBOK, which was a sundown station, which meant that it was a station that signed off at the end of the day. When the sun went down, we had to go off the air. And my first job at WBOK, we were a sundown station. But then when WBOK moved from Baronne Street to Tulane Avenue, we were able to acquire a new frequency, 1230, and we became a 24-hour station. So we began looking for programming that we could do at night. So WBOK went from a sundown to a midnight station. So after about a year, I went to the owner of the station and I said, look, when we sign off at midnight, there's only one other thing on radio in New Orleans, Larry King. And I said, I would like to start a jazz show from midnight to 4 a.m. on our station. So he had been supportive of me starting my original jazz show. So he said, okay. So I started this jazz show from midnight to 4 a.m. And the ratings proved that ultimately I beat Larry King, the late Larry King, who just passed last year. He and I were the only two stations on the air in New Orleans after midnight during that period. And while I was doing my jazz show, in the old days when you worked in black radio, you did everything. I started in radio as a host of the Stars of Tomorrow show that I was a guest on at one time. Then I went into sports. I did play-by-play in color on football and baseball games and basketball games with Champ Clark. And then finally it came to the time they said, we need you to do some R&B shows. And that's when the last time we talked, I shared with you a very unique experience I had once I got into that venue. We talked earlier about the fact that my first formal experience with concerts was one presented to me by my big brother sitting there. Mike, when he was in college, was in charge of getting all of the ushers for concerts in the municipal auditorium with black audiences. So whenever there was a concert in the municipal auditorium, the organizers would go to Michael and Mike say, Mike, will you get the ushers? And Mike was a big frat man in the fraternity, a big man on campus, and he would get his frat brothers and they'd serve as ushers. And one day after I'd gotten a job on the radio station, Mike said, how would you like to come and work as an usher for one of the concerts with me? I said, sure. So I remember one of the first concerts, it was featuring, the star was Jackie Wilson. And there was a guy named Larry Williams, who was a performing artist who was on before Jackie Wilson came on. And he sat down, he was singing, and he sat down on the end of the stage, and his feet were dangling, suggesting he might go down into the audience or whatever. This is my recollection of the event. And a policeman came along. I didn't hear, this is what I saw. I saw the policeman go up to Larry Williams and tap him on his knee with his billy club. And I'm told that he told him to get back on the stage, and Larry Williams, I guess, responded to him in a way the man must have felt was disrespectful, and a verbal altercation began. And it was evident to the audience, some of their conversation could be heard on the mic. So as the problem began to grow, members in the audience started throwing bottles and rolled up popcorn cans and everything down on the stage. And it kind of got out of hand to the point where the policeman pulled the fire hose on the stage in the municipal auditorium and said, "All of you N-worders out of here." Do you remember that, Mike?
Yes, I do.
You remember that incident?
I was in attendance at that particular event, and I do remember that activity. But as I was saying earlier, about the 25 years that I spent at WWOZ, which you were one of the founding fathers, was a very fruitful period in my radio career, because it once again afforded me the opportunity to, shall we say, be exposed to a much broader area of material that I was able to absorb. WWOZ is celebrating its 40th year in existence, and they're world renowned. They've won numerous awards for the different types of presentations. They were especially accoladed for their sponsorship of musical styles that are not usually heard on commercial radio. And so they are, at a high pinnacle in the radio annals these days, from the hard work that has been put into that station over the last 40 years. Unfortunately, in 2005, Hurricane Katrina put a roadblock to everything, and New Orleans was shut down. I subsequently relocated to Richmond, Virginia, where I embarked upon a career at radio station WRIR, which was so coincidental because when I came to New Orleans from Galveston, Texas, WWOZ was in its second year of existence. And when I moved here to Richmond, Virginia, WRIR was in its second year of existence. And in fact, next week, I will be celebrating my 15th anniversary here at WRIR, and the station is actually in its 16th year of broadcasting. And we were one of the first low-power radio stations in the country. And I've been the jazz director at the station for the last 12 years, and I am responsible for the program content of the jazz presentation at the station. I wanted to, I had some memories of WWOZ that came up from the years that I was there broadcasting in the program format known as Jazz from the Park. It was the drive time afternoon presentation. And I would have local and national, international artists that were appearing in town that would come on the show to do promos for the concerts. And I just were off the top of my head. Everybody in my generation will remember an extended LP release of Porgy and Bess from the great Ray Charles and vocalist Cleo Lane. Cleo Lane was in New Orleans performing at the Sanger Theater, and she came on my show, and she actually autographed my LP set that I had of Porgy and Bess with her. Unfortunately, it went under in Katrina. But the same as with Nat Adley, Cannonball Adley's brother, he had autographed a lot of LPs for me. They went under in the hurricane. But I also remember, Eddie Cleanhead, Vincent, Donald Byrd, to name a few. But as a result of having the notoriety that I had acquired from doing my radio show over that long period of time, I had the good fortune to get to be an MC for numerous concerts and presentations throughout the city. And, I can fortunately say that I had the opportunity to meet and present people like Miles Davis, Cannonball Adley, Sarah Vaughan, Max Roach, Carmen McRae, Art Blake, and the Jazz Messengers, to name a few. And since I've been here in Richmond, I've also continued to present people at the Richmond Jazz Festival and the Richmond Folk Festival. And as I mentioned earlier, have given lectures in jazz history at Virginia Commonwealth University. I don't want to take up all the time, so I yield to you, and you can.
It's our time, okay? So I mean, but I'm glad you're giving me an in here, because while you were gone, in that same venue that you first brought me into and exposed me to the music, some significant things happened. I'll start at the end. One of the things that happened is that I got together with a group buddies of mine in New Orleans, Lester Williams, Dan Williams, Lester Johnson, Beverly, a group of people, and we formed an organization called Success Unlimited. And we began, we began promoting shows in the municipal auditorium. And one of the first acts that we brought into the municipal auditorium was Cannonball Adley Sextet. And I've got a lot of pictures I'll share with you sometime that we took backstage. I don't want to spend too much time on any one, because you're moving a whole lot faster than I wanted us to move. I'd like to go back a little, if I might, because I was telling you about the last thing I was telling you about was how you had introduced me to concerts and things at the municipal auditorium. And eventually I began promoting concerts with major jazz acts in the municipal auditorium. But from the start, when you brought me to the time that I began producing shows, something else happened. One night, because I was a DJ on a very popular radio station, I was invited to go backstage to meet the main act of the show. So I walked into this guy's dressing room, and the young man who was standing there said, "This is Mr. Al Gurrier." And he said to me, "Oh, Mr. Gommier, how you doing?" Well, the guy had trouble pronouncing my name. About 10 years later, I met the same guy in the Dallas airport, and he said to me, "How you doing, Mr. Gommier?" But the first time I met him was in his dressing room in the municipal auditorium in New Orleans. I went backstage, I introduced myself, and I shook his hand. And when I took my hand away, I looked in my hand, and I had $100 bill. And I turned to the man and I said, "Thank you very much, Mr. James Brown." James Brown gave me the first crisp, brand new $100 bill I ever had in my life. Now, that wasn't the last one, because I'm talking now about the late 60s. I was in the midst of what was called payola. And if you wanted to get a record played on the radio, the way to get it played was payola. And I mean the money road. And it got so far out of hand that it was money. Record companies were providing cars and houses and women and dope. Oh man, hey. Anyway, the payola period, I survived. And my jazz show thrived. And by 1970, the Sounds of Jazz with Al Gurrier had propelled me to the point where I was being called the Dean of Southern Jazz Broadcasters. And it was such a prolific time that I actually got to be the cover story on a popular magazine in New Orleans called Data News. And yeah, that's me, same guy. Little bit more hair on top. But this was a 1970 story. It was entitled Al Gurrier. For him, every night is a jazz fest. So it was the success that I had in radio. And this story was published in May of 1970. So the Jazz Fest, which was the forerunner of the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation, had been founded and was producing concerts in Congo Square in New Orleans. And they were not involving the host of the only jazz show in New Orleans. So what should I do? Should I just sit down and do nothing, or just keep my mouth shut and go on about my business? I wouldn't be a Gurrier. So I wrote a letter to the mayor of the city of New Orleans, and I'd like to share a copy of that with you sometime. I wrote a letter to Mayor Moon Landrieu, and I said to him, here in our city, the home of jazz, we're trying to begin a method of promoting jazz by having these concerts. But for some reason, there's no need for a person who has experience and expertise, and probably the foremost promoter of jazz in our town at this time. There's no use for me. Shortly thereafter, I got an invitation to become a member of the board of directors of the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation. That's how I got on the board. And I did have the pleasure of serving on the board for 10 years. It was a marvelous opportunity for me. With my jazz show and being a member of the board of directors, I had the opportunity of interviewing Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, Rahsaan Roland Kirk, Ramsey Lewis. Mike's got an even longer career. Mike's still in the business and he's still interviewing people. So for me to go on and say everybody, it would just, let me just tell you about one. And like Mike, I'm the victim of Hurricane Katrina. As a DJ, record companies would send you albums. I told record companies, don't send me 45s. They would send me albums. So every jazz album, for the most part, that was produced from about 1965 to 1985, I got a copy of it. And there was a point where I had a room in my house. Now I have 7 children, but I still had to have a room to accommodate the jazz albums that I had. And I said, okay, send some to Brother Mike, and I heard Mike say a little earlier that, but I remember at one time I had over 50,000 albums in my jazz collection. Most of them, unfortunately, I lost in Hurricane Katrina. And on the bottom of my record shelf, I kept my tapes. And the interviews I had with the people that I mentioned and many others, I lost. But I can tell you, when I went into the apartment of Duke Ellington had about 100 medicine bottles on his dresser. And I said, ooh, Duke, I said, looks like you've got every vitamin known to man. And Duke Ellington told me he took every vitamin to stay healthy. Tell you another. One famous star I interviewed twice. She was playing at the Blue Room Hotel, the Blue Room of the Roosevelt Hotel. My cousin Joe Simon hooked me up, said, hey, my cousin is the top DJ in town. We ought to get him to come into some of the ideas. So I started going over to the Roosevelt, and the Roosevelt Hotel arranged for me to interview this guest. I went in to her apartment. Elderly white gentleman sat me down. And so she came in and she sat down, and, you know, in the business, we kind of want to warm people up. So I started chatting with the young lady, and she said, what are you doing? I said, well, in the business, we call this warming up, and I'm trying to warm you up. She said, get out of here. And she called the guy, and the guy came and opened the door and said, would you please leave? Sarah Vaughan threw me out of her apartment at the Roosevelt Hotel. So I said, that's all right. Sarah, I'm going to continue to play your records, girl. 5 years later to the day, guess who came back to perform again in the Blue Room of the Roosevelt Hotel? Guess who was the #1 jazz DJ in the region that everybody was looking forward to hearing Sarah Vaughan on his show? The Al Gurrier Sound of Jazz show. I went to Sarah Vaughan's apartment, knocked on the door, went in, I sat down, she came. She didn't even know me. She had never seen me before. But I told her the same story I just told you. And the last time I said, when you threw me out, I remember when after you said to me, you didn't need any warming up, I said to you, that's why they call you Sassy Sarah. And that's when you told me to get out. She laughed. She gave me an interview. I had a great interview with Sarah Vaughan. I only have one better story than that, and that's with Etta James, but I'll tell you about that later. But having the opportunity to be exposed to the talent and artists, with Success Unlimited, I had an interview with Ramsey Lewis. Ramsey Lewis was at the Playboy Club in New Orleans. Believe it or not, there was a Playboy Club in New Orleans. That's where I first met Ellis Marcellus. And Ramsey Lewis performed at the Playboy Club in New Orleans, and I had a chance to meet and talk with him. And he had 2 sidemen with him, L.D. Young and Red Hope, a drummer and a bass. And after a while, the original Ramsey Lewis trio kind of split up, and L.D. Young and Red Hope started their own group called Young Hope Unlimited. They actually had a top 40 tune. I don't remember the name of it, but they got to be real popular. And I brought them back to New Orleans, and they did a concert with me, the Young Hope trio, and I had a great interview with them. I had an interview with the Pointer Sisters. It was probably one of the most unique experiences that I had in dealing with and interviewing artists. But the success of the show that I had, The Sounds of Jazz, was based on the fact of my own personal experience that I had had with jazz. It had been limited because there was no jazz on Black radio in New Orleans. And we had some clubs in New Orleans. I remember going to the Dewdrop. I remember we used to have a jazz group at Hayes Chicken Shack. And Brother Mike, your brother Al, was also big in the disco era. There was a time where I began to do jazz discos, Le Chat Boutique. There was a club over on Frenchman. I used to work for Whitney Barconi, who owned a couple of nightclubs, one on Katie's. I worked for Prout. I did jazz disco sessions. I actually had an opportunity to do a jazz disco in the Superdome. And when I moved to Las Vegas, I had already been here to Vegas once I came to Vegas about 1977, and I met a gentleman who was a student of mine when I taught at Carver. In a previous life, I was a teacher. I taught school at Carver, and I went to Las Vegas with my wife, and we were playing at Little Caesars, which has been blown up like all of the other old hotels here. And the machine jammed on me. So I put my light on, and here comes this guy. And as soon as he turns the corner, before he even gets to my machine, he says, "Al Gurrier." And my wife turns to me and says, "I can't go anywhere without somebody knowing this guy." And it was Roger Cook. He was a student at Carver when I was teaching there. And he said, "Man, what are you doing?" I said, "My wife and I are just here for a little vacation." He said, "Well, come on, I want to take you over to the top club in Las Vegas. It's called the Moulin Rouge." So we went over to the Moulin Rouge, and it was being run by a Black woman at the time. Her name was Sarah Knight Purdy. And Roger introduced me to Miss Purdy, and he had booked acts in the Moulin Rouge, and he said, "We really need to get Al Gurrier to come to Vegas and do a disco for us in the Moulin Rouge." And sure enough, before the night was over, we had made arrangements, and within a year or two, I came back to Vegas and actually did a disco at the Moulin Rouge that's since been torn down and is a very historical landmark in Las Vegas, Nevada. But I performed in the Moulin Rouge back in the late 70s. And of course, by the time I got here, I had grown up and I was very involved with Kwanzaa. And I conducted the first Kwanzaa activity in the Moulin Rouge Hotel, something that's very close to my heart, being the Kwanzaa master of Las Vegas. But it's all about us, our music. And I define jazz as Black folks playing Black folks music. And we've got to use every means that we possibly can to help promote our music. And I know you've been involved in communications, and I've seen numerous pictures. And tell me about some of the artists that you've been in communication with.
Well, most recently, I guess I could say that I'm, just reminiscing at this particular time, because as I've gotten older and the opportunity to interact with the musicians has, decreased. But I'm still doing my opportunity is still present for me to do my historical lectures, and I'm still, telling people about how jazz started in New Orleans and the integral parts that were present in those formative years. And I'm doing the radio show on WRIR, and still, being a drum major for America's Original Performance Art Form.
I understand that you've recently joined the National African American Jazz Legacy Planning Committee, which we both are members of. It is an effort that was initiated by Dr. Ronald Myers. Dr. Myers was one of the primary movers and shakers that have brought together and established what we know as the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation. In 1997, Doc Myers, with the help of John Mosley, in a church in New Orleans, brought together all of the national organizations that had been promoting Juneteenth and formed the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation. And that organization today has become a very powerful organization. Last year, the NJOF was able to get 99 senators in the United States to agree to an observation of Juneteenth Day. Of course, in order to make it happen, you need 100. So last year, there was one senator, Johnson of Wisconsin, who objected. And as a result, the effort has been carried over, and there's a real drum major. We call her the grandmother of Juneteenth, Miss Opal, has recently been back to the new Congress and has presented petitions. And we're in the Juneteenth Foundation organization is again in the hunt to get the recognition of Juneteenth from the National Congress. So I'm happy that you've joined us in that effort. What's happening? Go ahead.
I wanted to interject a point, tell you, as the old cliche goes, show you how small the world it is. My wife was born and raised in Galveston, Texas, which is the original site of the original Juneteenth celebration. It actually happened many days. I lived in Galveston, Texas for about 12 or 13 years, and on a daily basis, I would drive in front of a building which is called the Ashton Villa. It's an Italianate style building. It was built in the mid 19th century, and it was from that balcony that the United States naval officer actually proclaimed to the newly freed slaves in Galveston, Texas, that Abraham Lincoln had freed the slaves. And it was just coincidental that, my wife was from there, and I had the opportunity to live in Galveston, which at one time was called the Wall Street of the South, until they moved everything to Houston. And have very fond memories of living in Galveston, Texas, the original site of the original Juneteenth celebration.
Well, our program today is co-sponsored by Juneteenth Nevada. And as a participant in NJOF Nevada, I've learned the story. And I'll be able to tell how good a story I tell by the look I get on the face of Mr. Steve Williams, the current president of NJOF, who is a real authority on the history of Juneteenth. But basically, in 1865, there was this ship that was on the way to fight the Mexican-American War against Maximilian, and the leader of the group was a general. His name was Granger, and there's stories about how many. It's from 15 to 4,000 soldiers he had at his disposal, but the majority of them were colored soldiers, and their ship was delayed in a storm, and their supplies began to dwindle. So Granger gave the order that they should stop in Galveston and resupply. When they stopped in Galveston, the black soldiers with guns got off and began to mingle with the residents of the community. And the residents of the community were told by these soldiers the fact that the Civil War had ended, that Abraham Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and we is free. And the black people of Galveston said, "What? We didn't know nothing about that." So the soldiers, the black soldiers, went back to Granger and prevailed on him that it was his job to tell these black folks in Galveston, Texas, that Lincoln did in fact sign the Emancipation Proclamation and that they is free. Granger issued, is it resolution number 3, Steve? And basically he shares with the freed Negroes of Galveston, Texas, the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation by Abraham Lincoln on January 1st, 1963. On July 19th, 1865, I don't know what I said before, but the day that Granger shares this information with the Black slaves in Galveston, Texas, that they are free, was June 19th, 1865. The Emancipation Proclamation had been issued on January 1st, 1863. So, there was great jubilee and celebration. As a matter of fact, the Black folks in Texas, at first they called it Jubilee Day, and then they called it Celebration Day, and then they called it Juneteenth Day. And that's what it has emerged. How was that story, Steve? But that's the story of Juneteenth. And Juneteenth was brought about by the efforts of the Black men with guns.
And it also
That's
started the celebration of the barbecue, watermelon, and red soda water. It still prevails today in Galveston.
Well, hey, look, right now, Juneteenth has become the most significant, and it is really the pivotal. I think Juneteenth is postured right now to become the most significant event in African American history for us. Because for the first time, we as Black folks in this country have risen up to the point where we said, this is us. This is our holiday, and this is what we're going to celebrate. There's not another Black holiday. Sure, we've got Martin Luther King Day, but they gave us Martin Luther King Day. This is our day. This is our story. It didn't happen without us. It's about us. And as W.B. Du Bois says, there's a trueness about the American Negro. And we would not divorce our African ancestry or our American heritage. And in the spirit of Sankofa, what we've got to do is go back and fetch it. We've got to go back and study the information, the history, and the culture of us as a people so that we can understand how in the hell did we get where we are now, and be able to understand that and to move forward. And there is no more potent or powerful knowledge that you can acquire in life than knowledge of self. And a good way to begin a study of self is by studying your history and your culture. And the last time we gathered, we actually started our discussion with a study of the history of us. If you recall, we talked about Ulysses Ricard. Remember what we said about that? Would you like to share that with our listeners?
Ulysses Ricard was a cousin. And my first association with him was as a result of his association with Dr. Gwen Midlo Hall, who was the author of the award-winning book entitled Africans in Colonial Louisiana. And Ulysses was Dr. Hall's lead researcher. And as a result of the expertise that he developed in researching for her award-winning book, he applied this to our family and brought up a proverbial treasure trove of information about the family. And subsequent to that, our cousin out in California also, has supplied a lot of
Luana says that.
Right. Go ahead.
Well, Luana has actually done a great job in putting together a study of the Gourier family dating back to Andre Théophile Melchior Gourier, who was born on the island of Corsica in 1795. And Corsica is an island off the southeastern coast of France. It was a French possession. It was educated at the Royal British Academy of Medicine Army. He didn't like what was happening with Napoleon, so he fled Europe, moved to Canada, and migrated to southeastern Louisiana, where he bought a farm in Bayou Gula, Louisiana, and began to practice medicine there, and actually taught youngsters how to be doctors, and was instrumental in the establishment of the LSU Medical School. So much to the fact that they named the street that the school is named on Gourier Lane in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So we have our own history, and we have just been trying to make an effort to share our history with ourselves and share our history with others. The fact that we both were involved in the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival is really significant because it has become probably one of the most premier jazz performances worldwide. And it certainly is a big moneymaker for the New Orleans area, as I've indicated, because of the structure. It basically gives away its money each year, and on as long as it doesn't rain on the weekend, the Jazz Fest is going to make $1 million. And they've had every act of a wide variety of culture, including jazz, to perform on an annual basis at the festival. So I'm glad we were able to touch on that. One of the things that I understood was brought up in the last planning meeting of the African American Jazz Legacy Museum was they were looking for someone who could share with them the different types of jazz. They felt it was important that if we were going to be dealing with jazz, we need to have an understanding of what we were dealing with. And you were the only one who could give them some direction and information about the types of jazz. Can you share with us a bit of that information? We're getting close to the end of our session today.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say before we move on, and as the old cliche goes, it's the poor dog that don't wag its own tail. Over the years, I've had the opportunity to interview numerous jazz artists at the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. In fact, the archives, which are located in a building in the French Quarter, has a repository of jazz artifacts that include over 3 dozen recorded and videotape interviews that I've done over the years with people as diverse as Dewey Redman, Abbey Lincoln, Chico Hamilton, Lil Jimmy Scott, Dee Dee Bridgewater, Kenny Barron, Frank Morgan, Randy Breck. I mean, like I said, I have over 3 dozen archived our interviews at the archives of the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation in New Orleans that are available for listening and an examination at that repository. And this is one of the reasons that I've had the opportunity to do so many is I've had a successful association with the festival, and the quality of the presentation has been such that they deemed that I should continue to interview the artists for general audience information and insight. And that's, something that I continue to do. I'm, like Dr. Martin Luther King says, he was a drum major. I'm a drum major for jazz music, and hope to spread the word to more people as time goes on.
I noticed that I'm aware of the fact that a very famous jazz musician by the name of Horace Silver, who is a very good friend of yours, actually wrote a tune for you. Tell me a little something about that, please.
In the evolution of my appreciation for jazz, when I first started listening, I was listening to the music that was around me at home as a child, church music, secular music. And then I segued into local music, where we heard what was now categorized as traditional jazz. And this was the jazz played by the African-American musicians that evolved from the late 19th century. And over the years, I've evolved my listening exposure. And when I first started listening to what was called modern jazz, I came in at the period that I was listening to trios, and you had mentioned about Ramsey Lewis. And I thought about the piano player that played with Red Holt and L.D. Young. His name was Don Hysia Walker. He was the one that they replaced Ramsey Lewis with after they left him and started their own group. But I was listening to Errol Garner and Ramsey Lewis and Ahmad Jamal, and I came along in a evolutionary type of situation where I started listening to trios, and then I had this epiphany, and it was the opportunity to hear the great release by Horace Silver entitled Six Pieces of Silver. It was an Alfred Line produced record for the Blue Note label, and it was an awakening because, as I said, I had, initially started listening to the church music and the traditional music and the trio jazz, but when I heard this 5-piece aggregation, and it was featuring at that particular time, that style of jazz was called bop or hard bop, depending on how intense the presentation was. Horace Silver was a piano player that was born in Norwalk, Connecticut. His father was an immigrant to the United States from the Cape Verdean Islands off the west coast of Africa. And he came up in Norwalk, Connecticut, and had a very distinguished career. He actually came to prominence in a trio playing for Stan Getz, and subsequently teamed up with Art Blakey to establish one of the most venerable and long-lasting and impressionable groups that has ever been in the jazz genre, and that's the Jazz Messengers. And Horace Silver and Art Blakey co-founded the Jazz Messengers, and the Jazz Messengers had, over the years of their existence, have had over 100 different members. A couple of years ago, there was a big music meeting in New York City where they had an alumni meeting of people that had played in the Jazz Messengers. And it was like a finishing school. Art Blakey would select artists that he felt had potential to spread the word of jazz, and he continued to do that throughout his lifetime. In fact, 2 days ago, his disciple Ralph Peterson, who he had selected as the next drummer for the Jazz Messengers, just died, and I had the opportunity to know Ralph Peterson. But Horace Silver and Art Blakey, shall we say, they separated, and Horace Silver had the Horace Silver Quintet, and Art Blakey had the Jazz Messengers. And both of these groups were seminal, pivotal groups. And if you go back and do a search in history of the two groups, everybody that came out of either the Jazz Messengers or the Horace Silver Quintet were subsequent, trailblazers in the jazz genre. And I was a big Horace Silver fan after hearing the tune on that release from Blue Note entitled Six Pieces of Silver. And the actual tune was called Senor Blues. And I was a big fan of the hard bop style of music that Horace Silver fostered. And so when I did my jazz show on WWOZ in New Orleans, I had a featurette that I would occur at 6 o'clock in the evening, because I had a drive time radio show. And from 6 to 6:15, I had a little featurette entitled Silver at 6 to expose people to the hard bop style of jazz music that Horace Silver had been one of the pioneers of. And somebody turned him on to that particular activity. He heard it, and he actually wrote a song for me in 1995 on his Impulse release that came out in 1996. It's called, the CD is entitled The Hard Bop Grand Pop. And he wrote a tune, and in the liner notes that he actually wrote, he says that he wrote the song for me because I was a drum major for his musical style, and he wanted to acknowledge the contribution that I had made. And he also wrote lyrics to the tune. And if you read the lyrics, which in the liner notes of the release, it has mention of New Orleans, type of assemblage. And it's something that I actually now use as my theme song on my radio show here at WRIR. We've got silver.
So how can people listen to your jazz show on the radio?
Our station streams, and we also have a 2-week archive of the shows. And it's located at www.wrir.org. And I'm on Sundays from 9 until 1 a.m. Eastern time. And you can tune in the show live on the World Wide Web, or you can listen to the stream on the archive feature at our radio site.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. I noticed that you kind of answered the previous question that I asked you about the types of jazz as you went along. So thank you very much for that. And I had promised to share another story about my interviews. And I remember Clinton Scott introduced me to Mahalia Jackson. I was the MC of her show when she was on the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival in the Municipal Auditorium. And
let me interject something here, because I just saw this last week. Somebody posted a video on the web, and it was at the first jazz festival, which was held in Congo Square in New Orleans, the place of African retention in the city of New Orleans, where the African slaves used to get together on Sunday afternoons and retain the African heritage that they had brought with them from the motherland. We were fortunate enough to have, WWOZ was fortunate enough to be domiciled in Armstrong Park, which is the site of Congo Square. And
that was the only place in the New World where African slaves could play their music and sing their songs. And it happened on Sundays. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's the place of African retention. And you have to realize that there were the African slave trade, which would take up another, segment of time that we can do a show on, dealing with the different African tribes that were brought to New Orleans. But there were the Mandinkas, the Senegalese, the Wolofs, the Fulas, the Sosos, the Igbos, the Papos, and the Aradas. And I had the opportunity to do a jazz tour with the great pianist and composer Randy Weston. And when we were in Congo Square, I was alluding to some of the African tribes that were there in the square, sharing their heritage with the rest of the people from the African continent. And I mentioned the fact that the Wolof tribe was one of the tribes, and coincidentally, his wife was a member of the Wolof tribe. And he was, very pleased to hear that somebody from her tribe, people from her tribe, were there in New Orleans and were, involved in the retention of the African heritage that subsequently was, very rudimentary and elementary and necessary for the evolution of jazz, because jazz is America's classical music, and it differs from European classical music in as it has various African components, whereas European music is sort of rigid, and you're expected to perform the way that the composer wrote the music. But jazz music has these African idioms that were retained and nurtured in Congo Square. And when you listen to jazz music and you hear call and response music, innovations, improvisations, the pentatonic scale, polyrhythmic harmonies, swinging forward momentum, and syncopation, these are African idioms that are incorporated into American classical music, that idiom we know as jazz. And there are many styles, and that can be for another day where we talk about the diversity of the styles of jazz. And I'll
But it was the emergence from the belly of the slave ship that came to fruition in Congo Square in New Orleans that were the roots that created the only true art form that this country has given to the world. Jazz.
Point of order. Performance art form. Because I still have to say that the Native Americans and their jury that was the original art form, but jazz is a performance art form, and it incorporates African idioms which were retained by Africans in New Orleans and incorporated into a European format that we now today acknowledge as America's original performance art form.
Well, we were incorporated into New Orleans and we created a form. I mean, we're part of the Creole culture of New Orleans in the derivation of the word, whereas originally Creole meant a mixture of French and Spanish. As you indicated earlier, LaSalle basically claimed most of what ultimately became the Louisiana territory, but it was the two brothers, Iberville and Bienville, who sailed into the Mississippi River early in the 18th century, sailed upriver. And by the way, when the first stop that the Lemoyne brothers made, when they came into the mouth of the Mississippi, they celebrated Mardi Gras. So the first Mardi Gras celebrated in the United States was celebrated by Iberville and Bienville, the Lemoyne brothers, who then went upriver and found a little plot of land where they found some native people living. And I was in a discussion with my grandson, Austin Guerrier, the other day. And I said to Austin, get up, move, get up from there, move up, move. I want to discover that land. And he looked at me like he was crazy, like I was crazy. And I said, yeah, that's just about how crazy your history is. How can you discover something where people are living? And you know where it really came to fruition? In Hurricane Katrina. Everywhere else in New Orleans, in your house, there were 10 feet of water. In my house, there were 8 feet of water. There's water in everybody's house but in the French Quarter. The two brothers who were given a grant by the King and Queen of France, King Louis and Queen Anna were the royalty of the time. They gave these French brothers some money and some ships, said, go over here and investigate the new land. And when they arrived, they said, we claim this territory in the name of our benefactors, King Louis and his Queen Anna. And thus the territory becomes known as Louis y Anna. And then the French began to come into the New Orleans area after the Bienville and Iberville Lemoyne brothers founded the city of New Orleans in 1718. And they weren't there very long, only a few years, and the balance of power shifted in Europe. and the Spanish took control of the Louisiana Territory. All of the Spanish began to send their people to New Orleans. The Spanish were in control of New Orleans for 80 years. Guess who built the French Quarter? The Spanish. All of the dominant architecture of the French Quarter is Spanish. Particularly of interest to me is the wrought iron fences. The wrought iron fences were built by Moors. Moors were the premier artisans of the world at the time. They came from Northern Africa, migrated to Spain. Some of them were probably on the ships that came to New Orleans and built the French Quarter. And the wrought iron fences in the French Quarter are examples of the Moor influence. Yes. Can you
Let me interject a point here about that transitionary period from the French to the Spanish.
Okay.
The reason,
because you know you have Spanish blood also.
Yes.
Did you know that?
Yes. I've had my genome.
Have you done a 23andMe?
Yes, I have.
And what did it say?
We'll save that for another time. But what I'd like to talk about is the topic that you brought up about the architecture in that transition from the French to the Spanish. The real reason for the French Quarter development was the result of two great fires. There is no native rock or stone in New Orleans. The landmass was created as a result of silt deposits of the Mississippi River, which came out of its banks on a regular basis over thousands of years and built the area up. That's why there's no flooding in the French Quarter, because it's the highest point in the city, just adjacent to
and native people were living there when the founders arrived.
But anyway, there was no native rock or stone, and so the buildings were built out of naturally occurring products: pine, cypress, oak, different types of wood. And these two great fires burned the city down, and so ordinances were effected that subsequent to that second fire, all the buildings would be built out of brick or stone. And as you mentioned, the Moorish craftsmen were, part of the Spanish contingent, because the Moors had invaded Spain and were part of the development and growth of that country for almost 700 years. And if you...
and the Moors were what? Africans.
They were Africans, yes, unequivocally. And one of the points that I also like to point out is there's a church on Baronne Street. It's actually officially titled the Church of the Immaculate Conception. That's the official name, but all of the local people know it as the Jesuit Church, because that's where the order of priests that was founded by Saint Ignatius Loyola set up their establishment. If you look from the corner of Canal and Baronne Street down the street and look at at the Jesuit Church, you see what Moorish architecture is all about. I've had the opportunity to go to Spain 3 times, and it's dominant. I mean, here we are in the 21st century, but these structures are still standing, just like that structure on Baronne Street is still standing and featuring the art form of the Moors from Northern Africa, right there on Baronne Street in New Orleans. You got it.
Well, I'd like to continue, and maybe we'll put a pin there. And the next time we get together, we'll talk more about the African influence in us and in our culture and our history and our music. But it looks like we've just about expended the gracious time offered to us today by the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation of Nevada and the Samuel L. Smith Educational Foundation that provided us with a platform to share this very fruitful discussion that we've had. I'd like to invite you to join me at another occasion where we could actually continue our discussion and talk about the rich history and heritage that we have both as a family and as jazz lovers. But I'd like to thank you tonight for your contributions. I want to encourage those persons who listen tonight to tune into your jazz show on WRIR FM Sundays from 9 until 1 p.m. on Sunday afternoons Eastern Time. I'd like to thank Ms. Dee Evans, Director of Communication, and Mr. Steve Williams, President of the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation, for arranging for us to have this modern technology where we can share our story both in visual and auditory at the same time, which is quite an accomplishment. I'm your host, Dr. Al Gurrier, and we journey to the end of another crossroads. Thank you for joining us today. Hope to see you again on our next journey.
Thank you so much.
Dee, did you
We
learn
appreciate
anything today?
Oh, did I learn? I still didn't get my question answered, but I'm still waiting to hear
guess
1865 to 1895. So we have another hour coming.